The edge of the iron spade, cold and slightly rusted, where the blade meets the wooden shaft, presses against the resilient surface of the Greenlandic meadow. The ground here is a dense, interlocking carpet of dwarf willow, sedge, and ancient mosses, a biological fabric that has spent decades knitting itself into a stubborn, fibrous hide. As the weight of the boot pushes the spade downward, there is a distinct, muted thrum, a sound that is more of a vibration than a noise, as the iron slices through the first few inches of root-matted sod. The resistance is consistent and heavy. Beneath the living green layer lies the dark, silty earth, still holding the residual chill of the long winter. The spade sinks further, encountering the hard, crystalline boundary of the permafrost, which sends a dull, metallic shock up the handle and into the palms of the hands. The iron itself is pitted, a product of bog iron smelting, carrying the microscopic scars of the forge where it was hammered into a utilitarian crescent. The process of cutting the strenger, the long rectangular strips of turf, is a slow and rhythmic labor that requires a steady, measured pace. Each strip is measured by the length of a man's forearm, marked out with the tip of the blade before the deep vertical cuts are made into the yielding earth. When the four sides are severed, the spade is slid horizontally beneath the roots, a movement that produces a wet, tearing sound as the soil is separated from the deeper clay and stone. Lifting the first strip requires a steady, bracing effort. It is surprisingly heavy, saturated with the moisture of the subarctic summer, its underside dripping with dark cold water that carries the fine sediment of the valley. The roots hang down like fine, pale threads, still grasping at the air, and the scent that rises is overwhelming. The deep, intoxicating aroma of disturbed earth, a smell that is simultaneously mineral, vegetal, and ancient. It is the smell of a landscape being unmade to make a home, a scent that lingers on the skin and the wool of the sleeves long after the work is done. One by one, these strips are carried to the site of the longhouse, where the foundation is already laid. Large, flat stones gathered from the glacial outwash settle deep into the ground to prevent the turf from sinking into the thaw. The construction of the wall is a study in patience and biological engineering, a slow accumulation of organic weight. Each strip of stringer is placed with its grassy side facing downward. This is an intentional act of sealing. If you find value in these quiet histories, please subscribe and like the video. The living blades of grass, when pressed under the immense weight of the layers above, flatten and interlock, creating a microscopic labyrinth of air pockets that provide the most efficient insulation known to the Norse world. As the wall rises, the damp soil of the underside of one strip settles into the crevices of the one beneath it, forming a structural bond that requires no mortar, no lime, and no clay. It is a wall that breathes, a wall that remains slightly moist to the touch, a wall that is essentially a vertical extension of the meadow itself, growing more stable as the layers compress over months of settling. By the time the wall reaches a thickness of 5 feet, the acoustic environment of the settlement begins to change in a profound and visceral way. Standing between two such walls is like standing inside the hollowed heart of a mountain. The constant, high-frequency whistle of the wind coming off the Davis Strait, a sound that defines every moment of life in the open, is suddenly and completely extinguished. The porous, root-dense earth swallows the sound of the ocean, the sound of the bleating sheep, and even the sound of other voices working nearby. Inside this 5-foot-thick perimeter, the only remaining noise is the sound of one's own internal rhythm, the steady, soft expansion of the lungs and the slow, heavy thud of the heart. The insulation does not merely block the cold, it creates a sensory vacuum, a place where the chaotic energy of the North Atlantic gale is reduced to nothingness. The earth absorbs the kinetic energy of the storm, converting the violent movement of the air into a faint, almost imperceptible vibration that can only be felt by leaning one's forehead against the damp, cool surface of the interior sod. As the interior space is slowly enclosed, the quality of the light undergoes a transformation. The harsh, pale glare of the Greenlandic sun, reflected off glaciers and whitecaps, is replaced by a heavy, emerald-tinged gloom that filters through the yet-to-be-roofed structure. The texture of the walls is a mosaic of dark browns, deep ochres, and damp grays, with occasional flecks of mineral quartz glinting in the soil. There is a sense of being subterranean while remaining above ground, a feeling of absolute enclosure that is both protective and heavy. The air inside the rising walls is still and cool, smelling of damp moss and the faint, metallic tang of the stone foundations. Every movement made by the builder is muffled, the scrape of a boot on the floor stones sounding distant and unimportant. This is the material reality of the Greenland threshold, a life built not of wood and light, but of the very weight and silence of the earth itself, a refuge designed to withstand the crushing weight of the coming winter. In the center of this silent earthen chamber sits the hearth, but the primary source of constant, low-level illumination is the soapstone lamp, the kola. Carved from a single block of soft gray steatite, the lamp is a shallow, heavy bowl that feels slightly greasy to the touch, as if the stone itself is permeated with the oils of 1,000 uses. The kola is filled with seal oil, a substance of remarkable viscosity and clarity. In its liquid state, the oil is a pale, translucent amber, moving with a syrupy lethargy when the lamp is tilted. It does not splash. It flows in a slow, heavy wave, its surface tension holding it in a gentle curve against the stone rim. The oil is thick with the caloric potential of the sea, a silent fuel harvested from the ice flows. The wick, often a pinch of dried bog moss, or a meticulously twisted strand of raw wool, is placed at the edge of the bowl, drawing the oil upward through capillary action. When lit, it does not produce the bright, aggressive flame of a pine torch. Instead, it yields a steady, unwavering point of amber light, a tiny sun that glows with a quiet intensity. This light is small and modest, yet it is incredibly persistent. It illuminates the immediate surroundings with a soft, warm glow that reveals the microscopic world of the longhouse. In the path of this light, one can see the tiny, silver dust motes that hang suspended in the still air. They move in slow, graceful orbits, caught in the minute convection currents generated by the lamp's warmth. They rise and fall like a miniature galaxy, their movements dictated by the quiet respiration of the room. The light catches the texture of the wall, highlighting the individual stalks of dried grass and the fine grains of sand embedded in the turf. The scent of the burning seal oil is distinctive, a heavy briny aroma that speaks of the ocean's depths and the cold skin of the pinniped. It is not an unpleasant smell, but rather a functional one, the scent of light and warmth in a land of darkness and ice. Near the lamp, the long fire hearth is fed with blocks of peat. In Greenland, where the forests are non-existent, The peat fire is the heart of the home, a slow-burning source of heat that requires constant attention. These blocks of compressed ancient vegetation are cut from the bogs and dried in the sun until they are as hard as brick and as dark as coal. They represent centuries of accumulated organic matter, compressed by the weight of the water and the earth into a dense fuel. When a block of peat is placed on the embers, it does not ignite with the sharp, crackling energy of oak or ash. It begins with a low, heavy hiss, a sound of microscopic pockets of moisture being driven out of the dense fibers. The fire moves slowly, an interior crimson glow that gradually consumes the mossy structure of the peat from the inside out. There are no leaping orange flames, only a steady, brooding heat that radiates from the hearth in slow, rhythmic waves. The smoke is thick and blue-gray, carrying a sweet, earthy perfume that permeates the woolen hangings on the walls and the heavy fur blankets on the sleeping platforms. This smoke does not rise quickly. It lingers in the rafters, forming a soft, protective haze that further dampens the acoustics of the room. In the presence of the peat fire, the passage of time seems to decelerate. The world outside, with its shifting tides and moving ice, is forgotten in favor of the steady, smoldering persistence of the hearth. Beyond the warmth of the turf walls lies the harsh reality of the timber crisis, a sensory experience of material scarcity that defines every aspect of life. To walk along the shoreline of the eastern settlement is to witness the tactile poverty of the landscape. There are no forests here, no groves of tall, straight-trunked trees reaching for the sky. Instead, the vegetation consists of dwarf birch and Arctic willow, stunted, gnarled plants that hug the ground to escape the shearing force of the wind. Their trunks are twisted into impossible shapes, rarely thicker than a man's wrist and never rising higher than a man's waist. They are a mockery of timber, suitable only for fuel or the smallest of household implements, their wood dense and difficult to work, filled with knots and irregularities. This lack of wood dictates the material culture of the colony. In the absence of oak or pine, the Norse must turn to the sea and the stone. Imagine the sensation of holding a tool whose handle is made of bone, the dense, cool weight of a whale's rib smoothed by hours of sanding with volcanic pumice. The bone is ivory white, its surface possessing a subtle, marble-like grain that is cool to the touch. It is colder than wood, holding the chill of the air for longer, and when it strikes another object, it produces a sharp, high-pitched clack, rather than the dull, resonant thud of timber. Every object, from the spindle whorl to the door latch, must be fashioned from these alternative materials, leading to an aesthetic of bone, stone, and turf. Every scrap of wood is treated with a reverence that borders on the religious. The most precious source of timber is the driftwood that arrives on the currents from the distant Siberian forests, carried across the pole by the shifting ice. You might find a single log wedged among the dark basalt boulders of the fjord, a gift from the ocean. This wood has been at sea for years, perhaps decades. Its surface is bleached to a ghostly bone-pale gray, and it is pitted and scarred by the abrasive action of salt and ice. When you run your hand along a piece of driftwood, you feel the grain has been raised into sharp, distinct ridges, the softer wood between the rings having been eroded away by the North Atlantic. It is incredibly dry, having been cured by the salt and the sun until it is light and brittle, yet it retains its structural integrity. A man might spend an entire afternoon sitting on the pebbles of the beach, his fingers tracing the grain of a single driftwood plank, calculating how it can be split and joined to create a door, a chest, or a loom. There is a deep, meditative silence in this process, a focus on the micro-textures of the wood. The salt crystals embedded in the grain glint in the sun, and the wood feels warm where the light hits it. This is the material of ships, the material of masts, and the material of the great ridge beams that hold up the heavy turf roofs. Without it, the colony would be immobile, trapped on the rocky shores of the fjords. The gaze of the Greenland Norse is perpetually drawn to the western horizon, where the sun sets behind a veil of gray. As the sun begins its long, slanting descent, it casts a pale, silvery light across the water, illuminating the sea har, the thick, rolling fog that often sits on the Davis Strait. This horizon is not a boundary. It is a question. Behind the settlers are the mountains of ice and the stunted willow. Before them is a gray veil that hides the reported lands of the West. There is a collective silent focus on that distant line. The air here smells of salt, dried fish, and the faint, lingering scent of peat smoke from the houses. But the imagination is filled with the reported scent of the West. The smell of pine resin, the scent of damp leaves, and the aroma of sap rising in trees that are taller than a ship's mast. In the quiet of the evening, when the wind drops, and the only sound is the rhythmic slop of the tide against the kelp-covered rocks, the isolation of the Greenland threshold becomes a tangible weight. You feel the grit of the sand under your boots, the rough texture of your salt-cured woolen tunic, and the coldness of the stone in your hand. You are living on the edge of the known world, in a house made of earth, lit by the fat of the sea, waiting for the courage or the necessity to sail into the gray fog where the wood grows tall. The materiality of survival has been mastered through centuries of adaptation, but the spirit is attuned to the horizon, to the rhythmic creak of the ship that waits in the harbor. Its oaken hull, held together by iron and moss, is a silent, wooden promise of a world yet to be touched, a world where the earth is soft and the trees are endless. The sheer mass of the Greenland landscape exerts a pressure on the senses that is difficult to articulate. It is a world of hard surfaces, granite, ice, and salt. Even the water seems heavier here, its temperature hovering just above the freezing point, its surface oily and dark. To survive, one must become as hard as the landscape. The skin on the hands becomes thick and calloused. The texture of the leather one wears becomes an extension of the body. There is a profound simplicity to this existence, a stripping away of the superfluous until only the essential remains: the warmth of the hearth, the thickness of the wall, and the integrity of the ship. Every morning begins with the same sensory rituals: the stirring of the peat embers, the refilling of the soapstone lamp, the checking of the weather against the mountains. The sound of the world is a series of low-frequency vibrations: the grinding of the glaciers in the distance, the lowing of the small, sturdy cattle in the byre, the rhythmic wash of the sea. These sounds are not distractions. They are the background radiation of life. They provide a sense of continuity, a reassurance that the world is still there, even when the fog closes in and wipes out the horizon. As we linger on this threshold, we observe the fine details of the tools laid out on the wooden bench. A needle made from a bird's bone, its point polished to a lethal sharpness. A comb carved from antler, the teeth slightly uneven, but functional. A bowl of turned birch brought from the old country, its surface smooth and dark with age. These objects are the anchors of identity in a vast and indifferent wilderness. They are the artifacts of a people who have learned to live with the silence, who have learned to find beauty in the grain of a driftwood log and the amber glow of a whale oil lamp. The Greenland threshold is not a place of transition, but a place of arrival, a place where the human spirit has been carved into the shape of the North Atlantic, patient, enduring, and eternally focused on the next slow movement of the sun. We move now from the stability of the turf-lined shore to the rhythmic, suspended reality of the open sea. In the year 986 AD, the Nar, a broad-beamed cargo ship built for endurance rather than speed, leaves the known coastal waters of Iceland, bound for the new settlements in Greenland. But the North Atlantic is a landscape of sudden erasures. We find ourselves entering the Sihar, a fog so dense and so absolute that it transforms the world into a monochromatic chamber of suspended moisture. Imagine the atmosphere not as air, but as a tactile weight. The fog does not simply obscure the view, it settles upon the ship like a wet, gray shroud. On the skin, it feels like 1,000 microscopic needles of cold, a persistent dampness that finds its way through the tightest weave of a woolen cloak. This is the white wall. There is no horizon, no sun, and no stars. There is only the ship, a small island of oak and iron, drifting through a void where the distinction between the sea and the sky has been completely dissolved. Listen to the sound of the water against the hull. The Nar is clinker-built, its oaken planks overlapping like the scales of a fish. As the ship moves through the swell, the water does not crash. It slaps rhythmically against the hull, a lap-tap sound that resonates through the timber. Because the fog muffles the higher frequencies of the world, these low-frequency sounds become hyper-focused. You can hear the individual bubbles of air being trapped and crushed between the overlapping strakes of the wood. It is a wet, percussive heartbeat that persists through the hours of disorientation. The sail, a vast expanse of heavy, hand-woven wool, has undergone a physical transformation. When dry, the wool is buoyant and carries a faint, lanolin-scented air. But in the Sihar, the wool acts as a sponge. It absorbs the fog, gram by gram, until the entire sail becomes a heavy, sodden weight. It no longer billows with a crisp snap. It hangs with a leaden, silent dignity. The dampness makes the fabric swell, tightening the weave until it is as airtight as a stone wall. When a stray gust of wind finally catches it, the sound is a muffled, low-frequency thrum, like the beating of a giant, wet wing. Beneath the mast, the ship itself is breathing. The Nar is held together not by rigid bolts, but by oaken tree nails, wooden pegs that have been driven through the planks and wedged into place. In the dampness, these tree nails swell, tightening the bond between the timbers. As the ship climbs a swell and descends into a trough, the entire structure twists slightly. This movement produces a rhythmic creak, groan, a sound of organic friction. It is the sound of oak rubbing against oak, of wood yielding to the pressure of the Atlantic. It is not a sound of distress but of flexibility. You can feel this vibration through the soles of your boots, a slow, oscillating tremor that tells you the ship is alive, moving in harmony with the water rather than resisting it. In this white void, the senses become internal. The smell of the ship, a mixture of salt-soaked oak, old seal fat used for waterproofing, and the faint, lingering aroma of dried fish in the cargo hold, becomes the only map you have. The world has been reduced to 30 feet of wooden deck and the persistent, dripping silence of the mist. Every drop of moisture that collects on the rigging eventually falls, hitting the deck with a pip-tap that marks the passage of a time that has no other measurements. In the center of this maritime stasis, we find Bjarni Herjolfsson. He stands by the steerboard, the heavy oaken rudder on the starboard side of the ship. His hand rests on the tiller, feeling the erratic, swirling pressure of the current. But his focus is on a small wooden object, the sun compass, or solskifa. This is a simple disc of oak, perhaps 6 inches in diameter, with a pin, a gnomon, at its center. In clear weather, the shadow cast by the sun onto the incised lines of the disc would dictate the ship's course with mathematical certainty. But now, the disc is merely a piece of wet wood. Bjarni holds it in his palm, feeling the raised grain of the oak. The wood has been weathered by salt, its surface slightly abrasive, like the skin of a shark. He waits for a shadow that never comes. The disorientation is not a sudden panic. It is a slow, creeping realization. Without the sun, the compass is a silent oracle. The North Atlantic is a place of north-moving currents and west-drifting winds, and without a fixed point of light, the ship begins to slide. Bjarni is no longer sailing. He is drifting. The sunboard in his hand feels heavy and useless, a cold, wet circle of timber that reflects only the uniform gray of the fog. To determine their position, the crew resorts to the most ancient of sensory measurements, the lead line. Imagine the sounder, a heavy, bell-shaped piece of lead attached to a long, braided hempen rope. The rope is stiff with salt, its fibers rough and splintery. A sailor stands at the prow, his breath visible in the freezing air. He swings the lead in a slow, rhythmic arc. The sound is a low whir as the weight cuts through the fog, followed by a clean splash as it enters the water. Then comes the whir of the rope. The hempen line slides through the sailor's calloused hands, a rapid, vibrating friction that produces a sound like a distant spinning wheel. He feels for the moment the line goes slack. Thud. The lead has hit the silt bottom of the North Atlantic, hundreds of feet below the hull. The retrieval is a slow, grueling process of hand-over-hand hauling. As the rope comes up, it brings the deep ocean with it. The water is a numbing, crystalline blue, dripping off the line in heavy beads. When the lead finally breaks the surface, it is brought onto the deck. In the hollow base of the lead, a plug of tallow animal fat has been placed. This fat is a sensory recording device. It comes up covered in the truth of the seabed. Bjarni leans in to examine it. The tallow is no longer smooth. It is embedded with tiny grains of gray silt, microscopic fragments of crushed shells, and perhaps a single translucent pebble of quartz. He rubs the silt between his thumb and forefinger. It is gritty, cold, and mineral. This is the only physical contact they have with the earth, a few grains of sand brought up from the abyss. By the texture and color of the silt, a navigator can guess his proximity to land. But in the shifting currents of the 986 AD drift, the silt tells a confusing story. It speaks of depths that should not be there, of a seabed that has tilted away from the known Greenlandic shelf. They are lost. The ship continues its blind crawl, the oaken trenails groaning in their holes, the sun compass remaining a blank, shadowless disk. The only constant is the rhythmic slap of the water and the persistent, damp weight of the fog against their faces. They are moving through a silent, liquid desert, waiting for a change in the texture of the world. After many days of this gray suspension, the world begins to change. It does not happen with a dramatic clearing of the skies. Instead, it is a subtle shift in the color of the fog. The uniform, pearlescent gray begins to take on a dull, bruised tint. The air, which has smelled only of salt and damp wool for a week, suddenly carries a new molecule, a faint, sweet, and resinous scent. It is the smell of terrestrial life, drifting miles out to sea on a land breeze. The sea har begins to fray. It tears into long, ghostly ribbons, revealing patches of a cold, slate-blue ocean. And then, through a gap in the mist, the horizon returns. But it is not the horizon they expect. There are no jagged, white-capped mountains of Greenland. Instead, there is a wooded, low-lying land. The first sighting is met with a profound silence. There is no epic music, no shouting. There is only the sound of 30 men holding their breath in the cold air. They stare at the distant line of the coast. After the infinite gray of the fog, the color they see is jarring, a dull, distant green. It is the green of black spruce and balsam fir, a dense, unyielding wall of vegetable life that meets the sea. Bjarni stands at the steerboard. He observes the land with a clinical, detached gaze. He sees no mountains, only small hills covered in trees. This is not the Greenland he was promised. This is a mistake. The realization is a cold, heavy sensation in his chest. He has found something, but it is the wrong thing. The ship draws closer, and the sensory details of the land begin to resolve. The water changes from the deep indigo of the abyss to a shallow, silted emerald. You can see the white line of the surf, not the violent crashing of a rocky coast, but the rhythmic hiss of waves sliding onto a sandy beach. The sound of the land reaches them, a low, distant roar of wind through millions of needles, a sound that is softer and more complex than the roar of the ocean. A sailor points to a group of trees near the shore. They are tall, straight, and impossibly abundant. To men from the timber-starved settlements of the east, this sight is almost hallucinatory. They see masts for 1,000 ships, ridge beams for 10,000 houses. But Bjarni's mind is on his duty, his father's farm, and the lost coordinates of his journey. He makes the decision not to land. This is the pivot point of history, executed with a slow, mechanical deliberation. Bjarni pushes the tiller away from his body. The ship responds with a heavy, groaning lethargy. The oaken rudder blade, a massive slab of timber, bites into the current. You can hear the water gurgle and hiss as it is forced around the curved surface of the wood. The ship turns slowly, its bowsprit swinging away from the green hills and back toward the empty northern horizon. The crew watches the land recede, and they feel the give of the ship as it catches a new wind, the sail finally filling with a solid, dry thrum. The green fades back into a dull smudge, and then into the familiar gray of the Atlantic. They leave behind the mystery of the woods, returning to the rhythmic lap-tap of the waves and the cold, salt-scented air of the open sea. Bjarni's mistake was a masterpiece of navigation in a world without light. He had found the new world by accident, but his senses remained tuned to the old. As the ship moves northeast, the memory of that low-lying green land lingers like the smell of the pine resin on their cloaks. A grainy, persistent image of a world that was not Greenland, but something entirely quietly new. The white wall has been breached, and though they sail away, the silent ocean has given up its greatest secret to the rhythmic creak of an oaken hull. The ship settles into its new course. The sun compass, though still hidden by clouds, seems less of a burden. The crew returns to their tasks, the splicing of rope, the sharpening of iron knives, the slow chewing of dried fish. The world is once again a matter of wood, water, and salt. But the silence of the ocean is now a different kind of silence, a silence that holds the weight of a continent just over the horizon. We leave the drifting uncertainty of Bjarne's voyage and enter the era of Leif Erikson's methodical retracing. Where Bjarne saw a mistake, Leif sees a map. We find ourselves now on the deck of the same vessel, but the intent has shifted from survival to investigation. The ship moves north and then west, following the invisible threads of maritime memory until the horizon changes. The first land we encounter is a world of pure, uncompromising mineral. This is Helluland, the land of flat stones. As the Nar approaches the coast of what we now know as Baffin Island, the sensory world is stripped of its complexity. There is no green here. There is no smell of earth or resin. The world is a study in shades of gray, silver, and slate blue. The ship does not glide toward a soft beach. It edges toward a fortress of ancient granite and weathered slate. The sound of the approach is defined by the clink and slap of cold water against the hull. The ocean here is clear, almost unnaturally so, allowing the eye to see deep into the frigid depths, where the kelp forests sway in slow, rhythmic undulations. There is a sense of immense weight. You feel the atmospheric pressure of the high Arctic, a heavy, still cold that seems to vibrate in the ears. When the boat finally grounds, the sound is jarring. It is the grating of oaken planks against smooth, flat stones. It is not the soft hush of sand, but a series of sharp, percussive clacks as the ship's keel finds purchase on the Hella, the great flat stones that give this land its name. You step over the gunwale and descend into the water. It is so cold that it feels like a physical blow against your leather boots, a numbing sensation that rises through the soles. As you walk onto the shore, the sensory experience is dominated by the sound of your own footsteps. Each step produces a unique clack-scrape on the slate. These stones are not round pebbles. They are massive horizontal slabs of rock, some as large as the ship itself, polished to a dull sheen by thousands of years of glacial pressure. They are slick with a fine film of moisture, and their texture is both smooth and abrasive. When you run your hand across the surface of a Hella, you feel the fine, crystalline grain of the granite, the tiny, sharp edges of feldspar and quartz that have been frozen in time for aeons. There is a profound absence of life here. Listen, there is no birdsong. There is no rustle of leaves. There is only the wind, which moves across the flat expanse of stone with a low, mournful hiss. It is a wind that has no obstacles, nothing to catch or tear it, so it remains a pure, consistent frequency. In the gullies between the great stones you find the only movement, the trickling of glacial meltwater. This water is perfectly transparent, a liquid diamond flowing over a bed of gray silt. To touch it is to feel the very definition of cold. It tastes of nothing, no minerals, no organic matter, just the pure, clinical essence of melted ice. The sound of this water is a delicate tinkle drip, a fragile melody in the vast, silent cathedral of stone. Helluland is a kingdom of mineral stasis. The only vegetation is the crustose lichen, ancient, slow-growing organisms that cling to the rock like dried orange paint. They have no scent, they have no softness, they are as hard as the stone they inhabit. As you stand on this gray threshold, looking inland toward the ice caps, you realize that this is a land where time does not pass. It only accumulates in layers of frost and stone. The materiality here is absolute, a world where the human presence is a soft, temporary intrusion upon a landscape of eternal mineral hardness. We return to the ship, leaving the silence of the stones behind. The journey south from Helluland is a slow transition of the senses, a gradual softening of the world's edges. As the days pass, the atmosphere begins to change. The air, which was sharp and dry in the high north, starts to hold a new kind of weight, a humid, heavy richness that speaks of vegetable life. The crossing to the next land is marked by the shifting color of the North Atlantic. In the deep water, the sea is a profound indigo, so dark it appears almost black in the shadows of the swells. But as the ship moves toward the continental shelf of what will be called Markland, the water undergoes a metamorphosis. It pales into a translucent gray-green, then into a vibrant, silted emerald. This color change is not sudden. It is a slow, chromatic drift that occurs over hundreds of miles. You can watch the change by looking at the wake of the ship. The frothy churn behind the rudder gradually loses its icy blue tint and begins to reflect the green of the seabed below. Then comes the scent. Long before the land is visible, the wind brings the news of Markland. It is the smell of the forest, a deep, intoxicating aroma of pine resin, damp earth, and decaying needles. After weeks of salt air and stone, this smell is overwhelming. It is a warm, terpene-heavy scent that seems to coat the back of the throat. It is the smell of growth, of ancient sap rising through millions of trunks. On the horizon, a dark line appears. At first, it looks like a low cloud or a distant bank of fog. But as the ship draws closer, the line resolves into a serrated edge. These are the trees, the first tall, straight trees the Norse have seen since leaving the Old World. To the Greenlanders, this sight is a vision of infinite wealth. The sound of the ocean changes as well. The slap thud of the deep-sea swells is replaced by the rhythmic hiss of the coastal surf. The air becomes alive with the sound of life. For the first time, you hear the caw of a raven and the distant, high-pitched peep of shorebirds. The silence of Helluland is broken by the complex, layered acoustics of a living ecosystem. The ship glides into a sheltered bay, the water becoming as still as a mirror, reflecting the towering wall of green that greets the shore. We step off the boat and into the embrace of Markland, the land of wood. The transition from the ship to the forest is a sensory revelation. The first thing you notice is the give of the ground. After the unyielding slate of Helluland and the hard oaken deck of the Nar, the forest floor of Labrador feels like a living mattress. This is the kingdom of the sphagnum moss. It is a carpet of vivid, saturated green that covers every inch of the earth, rising over fallen logs and mounding around the bases of the black spruce. To walk on it is to experience the ultimate muffled footstep. Your boot sinks deep into the moss, which yields with a soft, pneumatic hiss as the air is squeezed out of its cellular structure. It is a damp, sponge-like sensation. When you lift your foot, the moss slowly expands, returning to its original shape with a quiet, wet crackle. This moss is a sensory sponge. It swallows sound. In the interior of the Markland forest, the acoustics are dense and intimate. The wind, which roared across the stones of the north, is here reduced to a soft sigh in the upper branches of the trees. Every sound you make, the snap of a dry twig, the rustle of your woolen tunic, is immediately absorbed by the mossy walls of the forest. It is a place of profound green privacy. We spend time now in a meditation on the trees themselves. The black spruce and the balsam fir dominate this landscape. Reach out and touch the bark of a spruce. It is rough, scaly, and covered in fine, gray lichen. It feels ancient and dry, but then find a spot where the bark has been wounded. Here, the resin, the blood of the wood, has seeped out and hardened into golden, translucent tears. The resin is sticky and cold. If you press your thumb against it, it holds the imprint of your skin. It smells of concentrated northern summer, a sharp, medicinal, and sweet aroma that lingers on the fingers for days. This resin is the glue of the Norse world, used to pitch seams and waterproof leather. As we move deeper into the woods, we look for the knees of the timber. In shipbuilding, a knee is a naturally curved piece of wood used to join the ribs of the ship to the deck beams. In the Old World, these had to be carefully searched for or fashioned from great effort. But here in Markland, the trees grow with a wild, exuberant variety. Imagine the process of selecting a knee. You look for a tree where a heavy branch meets the trunk at a perfect 45-degree angle. This is not a joint made by man. It is a joint grown by the earth. The grain of the wood follows the curve of the branch, making it infinitely stronger than any joined piece of timber. You run your hand along the curve of the trunk. You can feel the strength of the wood, the way the fibers have knitted themselves together to support the weight of the limb against the winter snows. To harvest such a piece is an act of reverence. You use a heavy iron axe, the thwack of the blade against the damp wood echoing through the silent forest. The sound is solid and resonant, a thud crunch that releases a fresh explosion of pine scent into the air. As the tree falls, the sound is a slow, majestic crackle roar as the branches tear through the canopy, ending in a deep, vibrating thud that you feel in your feet through the mossy floor. The interior of the wood is pale, creamy white, and wet with sap. It feels cool and smooth, a stark contrast to the rough, weathered bark. This is the wealth of Markland. Not gold, not jewels, but the tactile, structural perfection of the wood. The black spruce provides the masts, the balsam fir provides the planking, and the gnarled ancient knees provide the skeleton of the fleet. As the sun begins to filter through the canopy in long, slanted beams of gold, you realize that you are standing in a cathedral of vegetable energy. The air is cool, the ground is soft, and the world is filled with the slow, rhythmic pulse of the forest. The materiality of survival has shifted from the struggle of the stone to the abundance of the wood. Here, in the green twilight of Markland, the Norse find the raw materials of their future. One thwack of the axe, and one step into the moss at a time. The ship, waiting in the bay, will soon be laden with this timber, the salt-pitted oaken planks of the old world meeting the fresh, resinous spruce of the new. The journey continues, moving south toward the promise of Vinland, but the memory of the moss and the knees of the trees remains, a grainy, tactile foundation for the stories that will follow. We settle now into the rhythmic, industrial heart of the new encampment at Straumfjörður. Here the Norse do not merely exist. They transform the landscape through the patient alchemy of the forge. We begin at the edge of the wetlands, where the water is dark, stagnant, and iron-rich. This is the source of the colony's strength, the bog iron. Imagine the sensation of wading into the shallows of a northern swamp. The water is cold, pressing against your leather leggings, with a heavy, unyielding weight. Beneath your feet, the ground is a thick, silty muck that releases bubbles of ancient gas with every slow step. You reach down into the dark water, your arm submerged to the elbow, feeling for the ore. It does not look like metal. To the touch, it feels like a collection of hard, pea-sized nodules, rusty pearls hidden in the mire. These are the iron-rich deposits formed by the slow, microscopic work of bacteria over centuries. You gather them handful by handful, the grit and silt washing away to reveal the rough, irregular texture of the raw ore. It is heavy for its size, a concentrated mineral weight that speaks of the planet's interior. The smelting process is a masterpiece of slow-motion intensity. We move to the small turf-lined hut that houses the furnace. The air here is different, warm, dry, and thick with the scent of charcoal and hot clay. The furnace itself is a chimney of hand-molded clay, reinforced with stones. Inside, the charcoal burns with a deep internal roar that is felt more than heard. It is a dry, shimmering heat that causes the air to dance and vibrate. Then, there is the sound of the bellows. This is the rhythmic pulse of the forge. A sailor works the twin leather bags, pumping them with a steady mechanical motion. Hiss-whoosh, hiss-whoosh. The sound is like the breathing of a massive, resting animal. With every stroke, the fire inside the furnace intensifies, shifting from a dull orange to a brilliant, incandescent white. The heat is so fierce that it dries the sweat on your brow almost as soon as it forms. The ore is fed into the top of the furnace, layered between the charcoal. As it descends, the pea nodules begin to soften. This is a transformation of states, from stone to liquid, from earth to tool. After hours of constant pumping, the bloom, a sponge-like mass of incandescent iron, is formed at the bottom. The smelter pulls the glowing mass from the furnace with long iron tongs. It is a piece of the sun brought into the dark hut. The sound of the hammer hitting the bloom is the definitive noise of the Viking Age. It is not a sharp clink, but a heavy, resonant thud-clack as the hammer drives the impurities out of the glowing metal. Sparks fly in slow, graceful arcs, dying as they hit the dirt floor. With every blow, the iron becomes denser, more cohesive. The metal is folded, hammered, and reheated in a cycle that feels infinite. Finally, we witness the creation of a single ship nail. The blacksmith draws out a thin rod of iron, his movements precise and economical. The hammer falls with a new, lighter rhythm, clink, clink, clink. The sound is higher now, more melodic, as the metal cools and hardens. The nail takes shape, a square-shanked, heavy-headed object, still glowing with a faint, ghostly red. As it is dropped into a wooden bucket of water to quench, the sound is a sudden, sharp hiss, followed by a cloud of steam that smells of wet metal and minerals. The finished nail is black, cold, and immensely strong, a tiny, singular miracle of human will that will hold the oaken planks of a ship against the weight of the Atlantic. We move from the heat of the forge to the cool, quiet interior of the great hall. Here, the sensory focus shifts from the metallic to the vegetal and the woolen. Against the turf-lined wall stands the vertical warp-weighted loom, a frame of smooth-peeled pine that reaches from the floor to the rafters. It is the architectural heartbeat of the domestic world. The sound of the loom is a complex, delicate thrum. To understand it, we must first look at the wool. This is the wool of Icelandic sheep, double-coated, coarse, and permeated with lanolin. The smell is heavy and animalistic, a scent of damp pastures and raw grease. As the weaver's fingers move through the wool, she feels the life of the fiber. It is slightly sticky, incredibly strong, and holds a natural warmth that resists the chill of the hall. At the bottom of the loom hang the loom weights. These are fist-sized stones of soapstone or local granite, each with a hole bored through its center. They hang in a long, even row, keeping the vertical threads, the warp, taut. As the weaver moves, or as the wind breathes through the doorway, these stones sway slightly. They touch one another with a sound like wind chimes, a soft, mineral clink-clack that provides a constant melodic background to the work. It is a gentle rhythmic sound that speaks of stability and the slow passage of time. The act of weaving is a study in incremental growth. The weaver passes the shuttle, a smooth wooden tool holding the horizontal thread, the weft, through the warp. The sound is a soft whish as the wool slides against wool. Then comes the beat. The weaver uses a weaving sword made of bone or wood to push the new thread up against the finished fabric. This produces a muffled thump, a sound of consolidation. Inch by inch the fabric grows. It is a dense gray vadmal, a cloth so thick it is nearly waterproof. You can see the texture of the weave, the way the individual fibers interlock and bind. To run your hand across the finished portion of the cloth is to feel the labor of 1,000 hours. It is rough, hairy, and immensely substantial. It carries the weight of the sheep, the weight of the stone, and the weight of the woman's patience. In the dim amber light of the hall, the loom stands as a silent monument to the slow, steady creation of the material world. Finally, we turn our attention to the floor of the great hall itself. This is not a static surface, but a living layer of the house that requires constant, rhythmic maintenance. The floor is made of hard-packed silt and clay, tempered with the ash of the central hearth. We begin with the sound of the broom. It is made of bundled birch twigs, bound together with a leather thong. The sound of the sweeping is a long, dry shh, a sound that mimics the wind outside but with a controlled domestic purpose. The birch twigs scrape against the packed earth, clearing away the debris of the day. A few stray fibers of wool, a wood shaving from a carver's knife, a crumb of dried bread. The dust rises in the shafts of sunlight, a fine golden mist that eventually settles back into the crevices of the floor. Once the floor is swept, it is time for the laying of the fresh rushes. We carry in bundles of dried sedge and sweet grass, gathered from the riverbanks. As the bundles are untied and spread across the floor, the air is filled with a new scent, a crisp, herbal aroma that cuts through the heavy smell of peat smoke and seal oil. The rushes crackle underfoot with a dry, hollow sound, providing a layer of insulation and a pleasant, springy texture to the walk. Along the walls of the hall are the sleeping platforms, raised wooden slats built into the turf walls. We witness the arrangement of the bedding, a process of tactile layering. First come the furs. We lay down the hides of reindeer, animals whose hair is uniquely suited to the cold. Each hair of a reindeer is hollow, trapping a tiny pocket of air. To touch the fur is to feel a strange, buoyant softness. It is deep, slightly coarse, and incredibly warm. When you press your hand into the hide, it leaves an impression that slowly vanishes as the hairs spring back. We layer these hides over the wooden slats, creating a nest of warmth. Over the furs, we place the heavy vadmal blankets, fresh from the loom. The combination of the hollow hair of the reindeer and the lanolin-heavy wool of the sheep creates a microclimate of absolute warmth. As the evening light fades, the great hall becomes a sensory sanctuary. The floor is soft with rushes, the walls are thick with turf, and the sleeping platforms are deep with fur. The sounds of the settlement, the clink of the cooling iron, the clack of the loom weights, and the shh of the broom, all fade into a single, unified silence. The Norse have not just built a camp, they have woven themselves into the fabric of the land. They have taken the bog, the sheep, and the reindeer, and turned them into a home. Listen to the silence of the hall. It is a heavy, satisfied silence, broken only by the occasional pop of a dying ember in the hearth, and the steady, rhythmic breathing of men and women who have spent the day transforming the raw material of the world into the architecture of survival. The settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows is complete, one nail, one thread, and one rush at a time. We shift our focus now to the arrival of the Thorfinn Karlsefni expedition, a moment where the wild, untamed silence of the New World is first punctuated by the domestic sounds of the old. The Nars have come to rest in the sheltered waters of the bay, their hulls low in the water, burdened not just with timber and tools, but with the very future of a colony, the livestock. Imagine the interior of the ship's hold, a dark, cramped, and humid space that has been the world for several sturdy Icelandic cows and sheep for many weeks. The air here is thick, a heavy mixture of animal heat, damp hay, and the sharp, ammonia-rich scent of manure. It is a warm, organic atmosphere that contrasts sharply with the salt-clean air of the open deck. In the dim light, you can see the breath of the cattle rising in soft, rhythmic plumes, a visible sign of their persistent, quiet life. The process of unloading the livestock is a study in slow, mechanical deliberation. There are no ramps, no easy exits. Each animal must be hoisted from the hold using a system of thick hempen ropes and oaken pulleys. Listen to the sound of the pulley, a dry, complaining creak scrunch as the wood-on-wood friction bears the weight of a 300-pound cow. The rope, stiff with salt and tension, vibrates with a low-frequency thrum that you can feel if you place a hand on the ship's railing. As the first cow is lowered toward the shore, suspended in a sling of heavy vadmal cloth, the sensory focus narrows to the interaction between the animal and the new earth. The cow's hooves, cloven and hard, dangle over the water. They are the color of dark slate, their surfaces polished by the bedding of the hold. Then comes the moment of contact. The hooves hit the wet sand of the shoreline with a distinct, muffled thud squelch. Notice the granular detail of the sand. It is a fine, silty quartz, saturated by the receding tide. As the cow's weight is released from the sling, the sand compresses. You can see the water being squeezed out of the granules around the hoof, creating a temporary, pale halo of dry-looking earth before the moisture seeps back in. The cow shifts its weight, its hooves making a rhythmic, sucking sound as it finds its footing. This is a historic sound, the first time the domesticated weight of Europe has pressed into the soil of the Americas. The sound of the cattle on the new grass is equally hypnotic. These are Icelandic cows, small, sturdy, and ancient in their lineage. As they are led to the meadows, they begin to graze. The sound of a cow grazing is a three-part rhythmic cycle. First, the swish of the long, muscular tongue as it wraps around a tuft of lush, green sedge. Then, the sharp, fibrous rip as the grass is torn from its roots. Finally, the slow, side-to-side grind crunch of the teeth pulverizing the blades. It is a steady, peaceful noise that speaks of abundance. In the early morning, we observe the milking. The air is cool and still, carrying the scent of dew and clover. A wooden pail, carved from a single block of birch, is placed on the grass. The sound of the first stream of milk hitting the empty bottom is a sharp, metallic ping. But as the pail fills, the sound deepens, becoming a rhythmic, frothy splat hush. The milk is warm, nearly the temperature of the cow's body, and it carries a sweet, grassy aroma. You can see the steam rising from the pail, a pale mist that mirrors the fog on the river. The foam on top is thick and white, consisting of thousands of tiny shimmering bubbles that pop with a microscopic tinkle as the milk settles. This is the sensory reality of the land of milk and honey, the warmth of the animal, the sweetness of the yield, and the steady, rhythmic pulse of the farm in the wilderness. As the settlement establishes its pastoral rhythm, we follow a single figure into the interior. Tyrker, the foster father of Leif Erikson. He wanders away from the group, drawn by a change in the vegetation. We move with him into a sun-drenched clearing where the forest edge meets a freshwater creek. Here the air is warmer, held still by the surrounding canopy of oak and maple. Tyrker discovers the vines. These are not the cultivated, orderly rows of a European vineyard, but the wild, exuberant Vitis riparia, the riverbank grape. The vines are ancient, some as thick as a man's wrist, twisting their way up the trunks of the trees in a slow-motion, decades-long climb. They hang in heavy, serpentine coils, their bark peeling in long, thin strips that feel like dry parchment between the fingers. The grapes themselves are a study in miniature perfection. They hang in small, tight clusters, shaded by broad, hand-shaped leaves. We focus on a single berry. Its skin is a deep, dusty purple, covered in a fine, waxy bloom, a pale, silvery coating that protects the fruit. If you rub the berry with your thumb, the bloom vanishes, revealing the dark, glossy skin beneath. The texture is smooth and slightly resistant. When the skin is breached, the sensory experience is one of sudden, liquid abundance. The juice is not just sweet. It is tart, complex, and intensely aromatic. It carries the flavor of the dark earth and the long, humid summer. The internal structure of the grape, the translucent green pulp, and the 2 or 3 hard, bitter seeds is a masterpiece of botanical engineering. There is no rush to harvest. We simply observe the weight of the clusters, the way they pull the vine downward, and the way the sunlight passes through the skin, making the berries glow like amethysts in the green twilight. Nearby, we find the self-sown wheat. In reality, this is likely Lamus mollis, or lime grass. It grows in vast, shimmering stands along the dunes and the river mouths. The stalks are tall, reaching to the waist, and they are topped by heavy blonde seed heads. Listen to the sound of the wind through the lime grass. It is not the hiss of the forest or the roar of the ocean. It is a dry, metallic whisper, a sound of millions of stiff stalks rubbing against one another. It is a rhythmic, undulating noise that follows the movement of the air in visible waves. To walk through it is to feel the dry, scratchy touch of the husks against your woolen leggings and the tap-tap of the heavy heads against your hands. The smell is dusty and sweet, the scent of sun-dried grain. The Norse see this not as a wild weed, but as a promise of bread, a material reality that moves them further away from the starvation diets of the North and closer to a world of carbohydrate wealth. The true test of Vinland, however, comes not in the spring, but in the winter. For the Norse, winter has always been a season of sensory violence, the bite of the frost, the howl of the gale, and the crush of the sea ice. But in Vinland, the winter is a season of confusing softness. Imagine a morning in late December. In Greenland, the ground would be a frozen iron sheet, and the world would be locked in a blue, perpetual twilight. But here, as you step out of the turf house, you feel something impossible. The air is soft. It does not sting the nostrils. It carries a damp, mild humidity that smells of dormant earth and salt. We observe the grass. It has lost the vibrant emerald of the spring, turning to a dull, weathered ochre, but it has not died. There is no frost on the blades. You can bend down and touch the grass. It is flexible, not brittle. There is no crunch under your boot, only the soft, familiar give of the damp soil. This absence of frost is a revolutionary sensory experience for the settlers. It means the cattle can remain outside, grazing on the winter-cured sedge, their hooves clear of the ice rot that plagues the herds in the north. Then we turn our attention to the water. In the northern settlements, the winter sound of the ocean is the sound of grinding, the massive tectonic groan of pack ice pressing against the shore. But here the water remains open. It is a dark, restless gray, but it is liquid. Listen to the sound of the winter sea in Vinland. It is a steady rhythmic wash against the sand. There is no tinkle of pancake ice, no shatter of frozen spray. The waves roll in with a heavy, predictable energy, their crests white and frothy, but their hearts remain fluid. This open water is a symbol of mobility and life. It means the fish are still accessible, the ships are not trapped, and the world is still breathing. The light of the Vinland winter is also different. The sun stays higher in the sky, casting long golden shadows across the meadows. It is a pale, honeyed light that lacks the harsh, blue-white glare of the Arctic. Even when it rains, and it rains often here, a soft, persistent drizzle, the world feels alive. The sound of the rain on the turf roof is a muffled drumming, a rhythmic, comforting noise that speaks of a world that is liquid rather than frozen. In this mild winter, the Norse find themselves in a state of sensory dissonance. They are prepared for a battle with the elements that never comes. They spend the long evenings not huddling for warmth around a desperate fire, but carving the wood they have harvested, mending their nets, and listening to the soft, liquid world outside. The bite is gone. The silence of the ice has been replaced by the murmur of the flowing creek and the sigh of the wind through the unfrozen trees. This is the ultimate luxury of Vinland, the gift of time and the absence of pain. The materiality of survival has become a matter of gathering rather than struggling. As we sit in the dim, warm light of the longhouse, we feel the softness of the air and the rhythmic, steady pulse of a land that does not sleep, but merely rests. The Vinland spring has matured into a winter of incredible liquid peace. Breathe in the damp, mild air. Listen to the open water. Feel the flexibility of the grass. The world is soft, and the winter is kind. Inside the great hall at Straumfjordur, the winter is a time of tactile industry. Because the weather is mild The men do not need to spend their daylight hours hauling ice or protecting the livestock from the killing frost. Instead, the interior of the hall becomes a cathedral of wood carving. Imagine the sound of the draw knife. It is a two-handled blade held by a man sitting on a shaving horse. He pulls the blade toward him along a length of fresh black spruce. The sound is a long, satisfying zip shave, a crisp, musical peeling of the wood. You can see the shavings curling away from the blade like ribbons of pale silk. They fall to the floor in a growing pile, creating a soft, fragrant carpet that smells of resin and fresh sap. The texture of the newly shaven wood is remarkably smooth, almost oily to the touch. The draw knife leaves a series of long, shallow facets on the surface, a rhythmic pattern that reflects the steady movement of the carver's arms. This wood will become the oar for a ship, the handle for an axe, or a stave for a bucket. There is no rush. Every stroke of the knife is a meditation on the quality of the timber, the lack of knots, the straightness of the grain, and the incredible supple strength of the Markland trees. Nearby, another man is working on a piece of lime grass weaving. He is plaiting the long, dried stalks into sturdy baskets and floor mats. The sound is a dry, repetitive crackle snip. The grass is brittle but strong, and as it is woven, it creates a rhythmic, geometric pattern of blonde and tan. The smell is like a summer meadow held in suspension, the scent of dry hay and sun-baked earth. As the carvers and weavers work, the central hearth provides a steady, low-frequency accompaniment. The peat from the local bogs burns with a deep interior glow. But here, they have added scraps of the spruce shavings. When the resin-rich wood hits the fire, it doesn't just hiss, it sizzles and flares, releasing a sudden, brilliant burst of white light and a puff of sweet, aromatic smoke. This flickering light dances across the rafters, illuminating the hanging bundles of dried herbs, wild mint and yarrow, which release their own faint, medicinal scents into the warm air. The atmosphere in the hall is one of profound, granular security. Every sense is occupied with the reality of plenty. The sound of the tools, the smell of the resin, the warmth of the fire, and the sight of the growing piles of useful, beautiful objects. This is the Vinland winter, not a season of endurance, but a season of creation. The settlers are not just surviving, they are refining their world, one shaving of spruce and one woven stalk of grass at a time. Listen to the rhythmic zip of the knife. Feel the warmth of the hall. The winter is long, but it is a time of quiet, productive peace. The land of milk and honey has become a land of wood and craft, a place where the human hand can finally match the abundance of the natural world. As the sun rises over the Vinland coast, the sensory world expands once more. The beach is a place of daily discovery. In the mild winter, the tide brings in treasures that would be locked in ice further north. We walk along the shoreline, where the sand meets the dark, tangled mounds of kelp. The sound of our footsteps is a rhythmic crunch, squish on the wet sand. The kelp, or sea wrack, is a study in marine texture. It is dark brown, rubbery, and covered in a fine, salty slime. If you step on one of the air bladders, it pops with a sharp, satisfying crack, releasing a puff of ozone-scented air. The tide has left behind a scattering of shells, large, heavy whelks, and delicate, translucent clams. Pick up a whelk shell. It is cold and heavy, its surface pitted by the sea. If you run your finger inside the spiral, it is as smooth as glass, a pale pearlescent pink that reflects the morning light. The shell carries the hiss of the ocean even when held far from the waves, a steady, white noise vibration that seems to come from the heart of the stone itself. Farther up the beach we find the sea timber. These are small pieces of wood, polished by the action of the sand and waves, until they are as smooth as bone. They are silver gray, their grain raised into beautiful, undulating ridges. To hold one is to feel the history of the ocean's friction. They are light and dry, the salt having replaced the sap. The air on the beach is sharp and clean, filled with the cry of the gulls and the rhythmic boom of the distant surf. There is a sense of infinite space. The horizon is clear, a sharp line where the gray-blue water meets the pale winter sky. There are no icebergs to block the view, no frozen bergs to groan in the dark, just the open, endless sea and the steady, persistent pulse of the Atlantic. This is the morning ritual of the Vinland spring-winter. The walk, the discovery, the breathing in of the salt and the pine. It is a slow, methodical existence, tuned to the micro-sensations of the coast. The settlers are no longer strangers here. They are part of the rhythm. They are the clink of the shell, the crack of the kelp, and the thud of the boot on the sand. They are at home in the abundance, one morning at a time. Breathe in. The air is cold but kind. The ocean is open. The world is waiting. Continuing the narrative to ensure maximum length and hypnotic depth. 5.6. The interior waters. The salmon's shadow. We move away from the salt spray of the coast and follow the freshwater creek inland toward the deep, shadowed pools where the forest overreaches the water. Here the sensory world becomes cooler and more acoustic. The sound of the creek is a constant, complex babble. It is not a single noise, but 1,000 small sounds. The gurgle of water over a mossy stone, the plink of a drop falling from a fern, the hush of the current as it slides through a bed of reeds. It is a liquid symphony that fills the ears with a sense of continuous, flowing time. We look into the water. It is as clear as the air, a pale tea-colored transparency caused by the tannins from the fallen oak leaves. On the bottom, the pebbles are a mosaic of colors: red jasper, green basalt, and white quartz. They are polished to a perfect roundness, reflecting the sunlight in dancing, flickering patterns that play across the surface of the pool. And then we see the movement. A shadow, long and muscular, darts through the current. It is the Atlantic salmon. These fish are the silver of the creek, massive, powerful creatures that have come from the deep ocean to the heart of the forest. The act of fishing here is a study in silent patience. A man stands on a flat rock, a bone-tipped spear in his hand. He does not move. He becomes part of the stone. He feels the cold mist of the water on his ankles and the smell of the damp moss on the trees. The only movement is the rhythmic blink of his eyes and the steady rise and fall of his chest. When the spear strikes, the sound is a sudden splash-thwack. The water is churned into a white froth, and the silver body of the fish is brought onto the mossy bank. The salmon is a sensory marvel. Its scales are a shimmering, iridescent silver, turning to a deep, bruised purple along the spine. To touch it is to feel the cold, slippery power of the deep water. The fish is heavy, a solid muscle that vibrates with a dying energy. The smell of the fresh salmon is clean and metallic, a scent of the cold ocean and the mountain snows. It is another form of abundance, not the sweet sugar of the grape or the heavy fat of the cow, but the lean, powerful protein of the wild water. As the fish is prepared, Its flesh is revealed to be a deep, vibrant orange, the color of a winter sunset. The process of smoking the fish over a slow fire of green willow is the final sensory act of the day. The smoke is thin and sweet, the willow adding a delicate herbal note to the rich scent of the salmon. The sound is a slow, steady hiss as the fat drips onto the embers. The result is a food that will last through the months, a salty, smoky, and oily treasure that carries the essence of the creek into the darkness of the hall. In Vinland, the water does not just provide a path for the ships. It provides a pulse of life that reaches deep into the woods. The salmon's shadow is the shadow of the land's generosity. We stand by the creek, listening to the water and smelling the willow smoke, feeling the absolute granular reality of a world that provides everything a soul could need. Breathe in, the water flows, the smoke rises, the world is full. As the day concludes, we return to the edge of the meadows. The sun is sinking now, not with the frantic hurry of the Arctic twilight, but with a slow, majestic descent that paints the sky in shades of violet, gold, and bruised crimson. We stand in the tall lime grass, feeling the air grow cool but never cold. There is a profound silence that falls over the land at this hour, a silence that is not an absence of sound, but a harmony of many quiet things. The lowing of the cattle as they settle into the earth, the rustle of the wind in the spruce, the distant rhythmic thump of the surf. In Greenland, this hour would be a time of retreat, of closing the heavy turf doors against the killing night. But here, we can remain outside. We can sit on the wooden bench outside the longhouse and watch the stars appear. They are the same stars, the Great Bear, the North Star. No, they seem to hang in a softer, clearer sky. The absence of the bite, that sharp, ice-edged wind that cuts through wool and skin, is the most persistent miracle of Vinland. You can feel the warmth of the day still radiating from the turf walls of the house. The earth holds the heat like a soapstone lamp, releasing it slowly into the evening air. We close our eyes and listen to the breathing of the settlement. It is a slow, collective rhythm of success. The Karlsefni expedition has found more than a land. They have found a sanctuary. They have found a place where the senses are not constantly under attack, but are instead invited to observe the micro-details of a generous world. The smell of the evening is a complex tapestry. The salt of the sea, the resin of the forest, the sweetness of the dried grapes, and the earthy domestic scent of the cattle. It is a smell of arrival. It is a smell of home. As we drift toward sleep, the last sensation is the softness of the reindeer hide beneath us, and the weight of the woolen blanket. The world outside continues its liquid, unfrozen journey. The waves lap, the creek flows, and the wind whispers through the tall, blonde grass. In Vinland, the spring is long, the winter is kind, and the sleep is deep. The arrival of the indigenous people, whom the sagas name the Skraelings, is not marked by the sudden clamor of conflict, but by a slow, rhythmic alteration in the acoustics of the bay. We begin with the sound of the water. For the Norse, the movement of a boat is synonymous with the creak of oak and the slap of waves against clinker-built planks. But the vessels approaching from the southern headland produce a sound that is entirely new to the Norse ear. It is a rhythmic, muffled slap hiss, the sound of a flexible material meeting the surface of the sea. These are skin boats, vessels of stretched hide over a light, internal frame of bone or wood. To understand the sound, one must understand the materiality of the boat itself. The hide is likely seal or caribou, cured in oil and stretched until it is as taut as a drumhead. When it hits a wave, it does not resist. It yields and vibrates. The sound is organic, a low-frequency thrum that resonates through the water. Listen to the paddles. They do not dig into the water with the heavy wooden authority of a Norse oar. Instead, they move with a swift, sweeping motion, catching the surface and releasing it with a delicate splash drip. The paddles are light, perhaps made of cedar or ash, and their movement is synchronized. As the boats draw closer, we observe the visual rhythm of the fans. The indigenous people hold up poles, waving them in a circular motion that follows the path of the sun. The sound is a soft whir in the air, a gentle displacement of wind. To the Norse, standing on the shore in their heavy, salt-stiffened wool, this movement is mesmerizing. It is a slow, silent language of kinetic geometry. The poles are smooth, stripped of their bark, and they catch the afternoon light in rhythmic flashes of pale gold. The skin boats glide onto the sand, not with a grind of stone on oak, but with a soft, yielding hush. The hide of the boat's hull slides over the wet silt, conforming to the shape of the beach for a brief moment before coming to rest. There is no metallic clatter of anchors, no heavy thud of gangplanks. There is only the sound of the wind through the lime grass and the rhythmic drip-drip of water from the lifted paddles. The two worlds stand in a shared silence, separated by 20 paces of sand and 1,000 years of differing material history. The exchange begins not with words, but with the tactile language of the vedmal, the heavy, dyed woolen cloth of the Norse. We focus on the texture of this fabric as it is unfolded. It has been dyed a deep, vibrant crimson using madder root brought from the distant markets of Europe. In the natural palette of the Vinland coast, all greens, grays, and ochres, this red is a sensory shock. It is an artificial concentrated intensity. Imagine the weaver's hands unfolding the roll. The wool is thick, double woven, and carries the weight of many hours at the vertical loom. It is rough to the touch, with a hairy nap that catches the light and softens the edges of the color. As the cloth is drawn out, it produces a dry, sliding shrrr against itself. The Norse begin to tear the cloth into strips. This is the definitive sound of the meeting, the zip. It is a sharp, sudden fracture of the weave, a sound of structural failure that releases a faint cloud of wool dust into the air. The zip is repeated, over and over, as the long roll is divided into narrow ribbons. Each strip is a concentrated piece of the Norse world, a fragment of the sheep, the loom, and the dye vat. In return, the indigenous people offer the wealth of the woods, furs of beaver and sable. The contrast in texture is absolute. Where the Norse wool is rough, structural, and honest, the furs are buttery, fluid, and impossibly soft. Reach out and touch a sable pelt. It does not feel like a surface. It feels like a column of warm air. The fur is so dense that the skin beneath is unreachable. When you stroke it, the hairs offer zero resistance, flowing around the hand like a liquid. The scent is deep and musky, a smell of the dark interior of the forest, of pine needles and cold earth. The beaver pelts are heavier, with a thick protective guard hair that feels slightly oily, the natural waterproofing of the animal. As the Norse trade their red ribbons for these furs, the two materials mingle on the sand. The vibrant, hairy, red wool lies against the dark, shimmering sable. The zip of the tearing cloth is answered by the soft rustle of the pelts being stacked. There is a clinical, detached focus on the quality of the goods. The Norse feel the weight of the sable, noting its warmth. The indigenous people tie the red cloth around their heads, feeling the rough, prickling heat of the wool against their skin. It is a silent negotiation of micro-sensations. As the trade concludes, a moment of profound material tension occurs. An indigenous person reaches out to touch the edge of a Norse axe. The axe is made of bog iron, forged in the rhythmic hiss and clink of the Stromfjordur smithy. It is a tool of pure utility, cold and gray. Observe the physical sensation of this contact. The person's finger, accustomed to the flake and grain of chert or flint, meets the bite of the iron. Stone tools are sharp, but they are brittle. They possess a mineral coldness that feels static. Iron, however, has a different kind of coldness, a dense, vibrating intensity. The edge of the axe is not just sharp, it is heavy. It carries the kinetic potential of the forge. When the finger touches the honed edge, the sensation is one of an absolute, unforgiving boundary. There is no give, no flake, only the singular metallic sting of the iron. The sound of the axe hitting a wooden post nearby is a deep, resonant thud crunch. It is a sound of penetration, of a material that can reshape the world. This is the clink of the iron world meeting the clack of the stone world. The two materials represent two different ways of being: the slow, patient shaping of the stone versus the violent, transformative heat of the metal. The tension is broken by a sudden acoustic intrusion. From behind the turf walls of the settlement, the Norse bull, the animal brought from the hold of the Nar, lets out a long, low-frequency bellow. To the Norse, this is a domestic sound, a sound of the farm and the morning milking. But in the silent Vinland air, the sound is terrifying. It is a deep, guttural vibration that seems to come from the earth itself. It is a moo that has the resonance of a thunderclap. The sound waves travel through the air, hitting the skin of the skin boats and causing them to vibrate like drums. The reaction is immediate and silent. The indigenous people do not shout. They move with a swift, fluid grace. The slap hiss of the paddles returns as they push off from the sand. The skin boats retreat across the water, the fans no longer waving in a circle, but cutting through the air with a desperate, rhythmic urgency. The Norse stand on the shore, the red cloth still in their hands, the sable furs at their feet. The bull bellows again, a lonely domestic sound, in a world that has just been irrevocably changed. The clink and the clack have met and retreated. The air returns to its natural state, the hiss of the wind in the spruce and the rhythmic wash of the tide. The meeting of two worlds is over, leaving behind only the scent of madder red wool and the lingering vibration of the iron axe in the wood. Breathe in the salt air. The beach is empty now. The red cloth is gone. The sable is warm. The silence returns, one grain of sand at a time. In the hours following the departure of the skin boats, the Norse settlement returns to a state of suspended, thoughtful activity. We move into the interior of the longhouse to examine the new acquisitions. The sable furs have been laid out on the large wooden table, their dark surfaces catching the amber light of the soapstone lamps. Focus on the visual detail of the fur in the dim light. The sable is not a solid color. It is a landscape of microscopic shadows. As the light of the cola flickers, the fur seems to move. It has a depth that the woolen vadmal lacks. You can bury your fingers in it, and the warmth is instantaneous. It is a trapped heat, the legacy of a small, fast-moving life in the deep woods. The Norse women examine the pelts with a clinical, tactile precision. They run their hands against the grain, feeling the slight, silky resistance of the hairs as they are pushed upright, and then watch as they fall back into place with a perfect, liquid smoothness. There is no sound to this movement. It is a silent, haptic experience. The smell of the firs begins to fill the hall, mixing with the familiar scent of peat smoke and dried fish. It is a wild smell, sweet, musky, and slightly metallic. It reminds the settlers that they are not in Greenland, and they are not in Iceland. They are in a place where the animals are rich, the woods are deep, and the materials of life are provided in an abundance that is almost overwhelming. Meanwhile, we consider the red cloth that has gone with the skin boats. That cloth, woven in a cold Greenland winter, is now moving through the forest, a bright, artificial splinter of the east. The Norse imagine it being torn further, divided into smaller and smaller pieces, until the madder red threads are scattered through the green interior of the continent. The exchange was more than a trade of goods. It was a trade of sensory realities. The Norse gave the hard, the woven, the iron, the artificial, and received the soft, the fur, the wild, the organic. This realization settles over the hall in a slow, rhythmic wave. The clink of a bone needle against a wooden bowl, the thump of a boot on the rush-covered floor, the hiss of the fire. All these sounds feel smaller now, more contained, in the face of the vast, silent world that has just touched their shore. We sit in the silence, watching the dust motes drift in the amber light. The sable fur is warm under our hands. The iron axe rests by the door, its edge cold and silent. The world is a tapestry of wool and fur, stone and iron, and we are merely the weavers of the moment. Breathe in. The hall is quiet. The sable is soft. The night is long. As the first night after the meeting falls, the sensory focus of the settlement shifts to the perimeter. The soft retreat of the skin boats has left behind a legacy of hyper-awareness. The Norse sentry stands by the turf wall, his senses tuned to the micro-vibrations of the Vinland night. The sound of the night is a complex layered hum. It is the sound of millions of insects in the marshes, a constant high-frequency vibration that seems to come from the air itself. Against this background, every other sound is magnified. The rustle of a small animal in the lime grass sounds like a footstep. The crack of a dry branch in the forest sounds like the fracture of a ship's mast. The sentry feels the texture of the turf wall beneath his hand. It is cool and damp, holding the moisture of the evening fog. He can feel the roots of the grass within the wall, a solid biological network that anchors the house to the earth. The wall is his shield, a 5-foot-thick barrier of silence and soil. He looks toward the forest. The trees are a solid black wall against the starlit sky. There is no movement, only the steady rhythmic sway of the branches in the light breeze. The smell of the forest is stronger now, a heavy resinous scent that seems to flow down from the hills like a cold liquid. In his other hand, he holds his spear. The shaft is made of Markland spruce, smooth and straight. The head is made of bog iron, cold and heavy. He runs his thumb along the flat of the blade. The metal is smooth, with a slight, oily residue from the whetstone. It is a silent metallic presence in the dark. This is the sensory reality of the frontier. The weight. It is a slow, rhythmic state of being, where the ears, the nose, and the skin are all working together to map the invisible. The slap of a wave on the beach is a known quantity. The hoot of an owl is a known quantity. But the silence of the forest, that is the unknown. It is a silence that feels full, a silence that holds the memory of the skin boats and the circular waving of the fans. The sentry breathes in the cold air, feeling it expand in his chest. He is a part of the rhythm of the night, a single warm pulse in a world of cool, dark materials. He waits for the morning, for the return of the light, and for the simple domestic sounds of the settlement to begin again. The clink of the milk pail, the thrum of the loom, and the shh of the broom. These are the sounds of safety. But tonight there is only the hiss of the wind and the thrum of the silent woods. When the sun finally rises, it does not break the silence, it merely illuminates it. A thick pearlescent mist has rolled in from the sea, blurring the boundaries between the land and the water. The settlement is encased in a white, muffled world. We walk out into the mist. The moisture settles on our woolen cloaks in a fine silver dew. The fabric becomes heavy and dark, the smell of the wet wool becoming the dominant sensory experience. It is a closed world. You can only see 10 paces in any direction. We move toward the beach where the meeting took place. The sand is smooth, the tide having washed away the footprints of the day before. But as we reach the high water mark, we find a sign of the exchange. A single strip of the red cloth has been caught in the branches of a driftwood log. It is sodden with mist, its vibrant crimson turned to a dark, bruised burgundy. We pick it up. It is heavy with salt water, and as we squeeze it, the water runs red, a faint pinkish stain that disappears into the sand. The texture of the wool is matted and rough. It no longer looks like a trade good. It looks like a piece of the earth itself. As we hold the cloth, we catch a scent on the wind. It is not the salt or the pine. It is the faint, lingering, musky smell of the sable firs. It is a ghostly aroma, a sensory memory of the people who were here and are now gone. The scent is thin now, fading into the ozonic smell of the morning mist. But it is unmistakable. The morning in Vinland is a study in erasures. The mist erases the forest, the tide erases the tracks, and the wind erases the scent. All that remains is the material reality of the settlement, the turf, the iron, and the wood. We return to the longhouse, our woolen cloaks dripping, our hands smelling of red dye and salt. The meeting has become a legend, a story to be told over the peat fire. But the sable firs are still there, soft and warm on the sleeping platforms. The iron axe is still there, sharp and cold by the door. The materials of the world have been rearranged, and the rhythm of the colony continues, one slow, misty morning at a time. Breathe in. The mist is cool, the wool is heavy, the world is quiet. The retreat from Vinland and the eventual fading of the Greenland settlements do not occur with the suddenness of a catastrophe, but with the patient, incremental advance of the cold. We begin with the onset of the Little Ice Age, a climatic shift that manifests as a series of micro-alterations in the sensory world. Imagine the sound of the North Atlantic changing over decades. The open rhythmic wash of the Vinland Sea begins to be interrupted by a new crystalline texture. This is the arrival of the pancake ice, small circular sheets of frozen brine with raised, slushy edges. As the ship's hull moves through these formations, the sound is no longer a clean slap or hiss. It is a rhythmic, percussive crunch-scrape, a sound of friction between the organic oak and the mineral ice. The water itself becomes more viscous, a thick, grease ice slurry that dampens the movement of the waves, turning the ocean into a heavy, leaden mirror. On the rigging, the salt spray no longer dries into a white crust. It freezes into translucent shells of ice. Listen to the sound of the hempen ropes. As the ship rolls, the ice-encased lines crackle and shatter, sending a rain of tiny, diamond-like shards onto the deck. The sound is like the tinkling of 1,000 glass chimes, a delicate, cold melody that plays against the low-frequency groan of the timbers. The summers grow shorter by a week every decade. You feel this in the dampness of the turf walls. In the earlier years, the sun would bake the exterior of the longhouse until the sod was dry and warm to the touch. But now the moisture persists. The walls remain heavy and weeping, the smell of damp earth becoming a permanent fixture of the interior. The bite of the frost returns to the meadows earlier each year, turning the lime grass brittle and white while the seeds are still green. The decision to leave is a process of material calculation. We observe the packing of the iron tools, the precious axes, the adzes, and the nails. They are not merely tossed into chests. They are wrapped in woolen rags, soaked in seal oil to prevent the red rot of rust. The sensation is one of heavy, greasy preparation. The wood, too, is harvested one last time. Great beams of black spruce and oak are lashed to the decks of the knars. The ships sit lower in the water, their frames creaking. Under the weight of the continent they are carrying away in pieces. As the last ship pulls away from the Straumfjordur harbor, the sensory world of the settlement begins its long transition from a human space to a biological one. The thrum of the loom and the hiss of the bellows are gone. There is only the sigh of the wind through the abandoned doorway, and the rhythmic lap of the increasingly cold sea against the empty shore. An abandoned turf house does not disappear. It folds back into the earth. We observe the anatomy of decay at Lens-aux-Meadows over the course of centuries. First comes the silence of the interior. Without the heat of the central hearth, the acoustic vacuum of the 5-foot-thick walls becomes absolute. The air grows still and stale, smelling of old smoke, and the slow, anaerobic breakdown of the floor rushes. The heavy oaken door, left slightly ajar, begins to sag on its bone hinges. Every few years, a particularly violent gale catches the door, causing it to groan and thud against the stone threshold. A rhythmic, ghostly heartbeat in an empty world. Then, the roof begins its descent. The ridge beam, no longer supported by the internal pressure of a lived-in space, starts to yield under the weight of the winter snows. The sound is a slow, tectonic crack, the microscopic fracturing of the spruce fibers over decades. The turf layers, once a biological seal, now become a source of weight and rot. Rain filters through the gaps, carrying silt into the hall. We watch the grass overgrow the forge. The iron-rich slag and the charcoal dust are slowly covered by a layer of moss. The sphagnum we once walked upon now claims the very heart of the industry. The moss is soft, green, and silent, its roots reaching down to entwine the cold, abandoned anvil stone. The clink of the hammer is replaced by the drip of rainwater, falling from a hole in the roof into a stagnant pool on the floor. Over a century, the walls begin to slump. The vertical layers of strengur compress into a single, undifferentiated mass of soil. The sharp, architectural angles of the longhouse soften into rounded curves. To a passing observer, the settlement no longer looks like a work of man. It looks like a series of natural mounds, unusual perhaps for their regularity, but indistinguishable from the surrounding hills. The grass grows long and blond over the sleeping platforms, and the wild grapes reclaim the timber frames. The world of Vinland has swallowed the world of the Norse. One sigh of the wind and one rustle of the grass at a time. The materials of survival, the iron, the wool, the wood, have either been taken away or buried under 1,000 years of accumulating silt and silence. While the physical settlement at Straumfjörður is being absorbed by the earth, the memory of it is being preserved through a different kind of materiality, the scratching of the quill on parchment. In a cold scriptorium in Iceland, centuries after the last ship left Vinland, a monk leans over a sheet of vellum. Vellum is not paper. It is animal skin, calf or sheep, scraped, stretched, and dried until it is a pale, translucent cream. To touch it is to feel a surface that is both smooth and slightly toothy, holding the memory of the animal's life. Listen to the sound of the quill. It is a sharpened goose feather, dipped in ink, made of iron gall and soot. As it moves across the vellum, it produces a dry, rhythmic scratch-scratch. This is the sound of the sagas being born. Each stroke of the pen is a physical act of preservation. The ink smells of vinegar and old smoke, and as it dries, it binds with the fibers of the skin, turning the ephemeral oral tradition into a permanent, tactile record. The stories of Leif, Bjarni, and Turkar are no longer just vibrations in the air. They are dark, permanent marks on a biological surface. We fast forward through the centuries, moving through the scratching of pens and the turning of pages until we reach the year 1960. We find ourselves once again on the shores of Newfoundland, but the air is different. It carries the scent of modern exhaust and the clatter of mechanical tools. Yet, the primary instrument of discovery remains the small, handheld trowel. Observe the process of the excavation. The archaeologist, Helga Ingstad, kneels on the same earth where the longhouse once stood. The sound is a rhythmic scrape-scrape of the metal trowel against the dark, compressed soil. It is a delicate, clinical sound. As the layers of silt are removed, the mounds begin to reveal their secrets. Then, the clink. The trowel strikes something that is not a stone. The archaeologist switches to a fine brush, a soft, rhythmic swish-swish that clears away the dust of a millennium. Emerging from the earth is a single small object, a soapstone spindle whorl. Pick it up. It is a circular stone with a hole in the center, used to weight the spindle during the weaving of wool. It is made of the same gray steatite as the kolla lamps of Greenland. It is heavy for its size, a concentrated mineral weight that fits perfectly in the palm of a gloved hand. The surface is smooth, polished by the hands of a weaver who lived 1,000 years ago. This object is the physical proof of the legend. To hold it is to feel the bridge between the scratch of the quill and the clack of the loom. The spindle whorl does not speak, but it carries the entire sensory history of the Vinland expedition in its weight. It carries the smell of the sheep, the warmth of the turf house, and the rhythmic thrum of the vertical loom. It is a silent stone anchor in the shifting sands of time. As we hold this small piece of soapstone, we look out over the modern meadows of Lanceau Meadows. The wind still hisses through the lime grass. The waves still lap against the shore with a rhythmic, predictable energy. The white wall of the fog still rolls in from the sea, blurring the edges of the world. The journey that began with the thrum of a spade in the Greenland turf has ended with the clink of a trowel in the Newfoundland soil. The stories have been told, the iron has been forged, the grapes have been tasted, and the silence has returned. The materiality of history is a cycle of growth and decay, of scratching and scraping, of clinking and thudding. We close our eyes and listen to the long, slow fade, the sound of the wind, the sound of the water, the sound of the earth reclaiming its own. In the silence of the legend, the world is still, and the memory is deep. Breathe in. The stone is heavy. The air is cool. The story is complete. Sleep.